As the end of the 1920s approached, the Regia Marina possessed 4 modern heavy cruisers in service or under construction, 2 Trento and 2 Zara class. Although both classes were treaty-breaking in their displacement, the former represented a prioritisation in speed, while the latter had traded 4 knots for considerably better protection. Although this left the fleet at a disadvantage compared to France, who had 6 heavy cruisers at similar stages and were about to order a 7th, the Regia Marina was initially willing to tolerate this as they anticipated building new battleships. But this plan was then cancelled, and then 3 out of the 5 existing battleships were also taken out of service. Dante Alighieri was scrapped, Conte di Cavour was placed in reserve, and Giulio Cesare became a training ship. So it was clear more heavy cruisers would be needed. Since the Italians liked operating ships in units of 3 where at all possible, a 3rd Zara class, the Gorizia, was ordered. This would have only minor changes since the Zaras were a relatively recent design. But the Trento design was almost a decade old at this point, and so the 3rd ship notionally of this type would need a few modifications made to stay up to date. This vessel would be named Bolzano and was laid down in June 1930, launched in August 1932, and completed almost exactly a year later. Although a 4th Zara, the Pola, was laid down in 1931, she was finished much faster, which would make Bolzano the last Italian heavy cruiser to enter service. Compared to her notional sisters, Bolzano differed in a number of ways. She had a more pronounced bulbous bow underwater, and introduced a long forecastle deck in an attempt to improve seakeeping. Although Trento and Trieste had slightly differing superstructures, the Bolzano was instantly recognisable thanks to a monolithic bridge tower that was fed into the forward funnel and enveloped the foremast. This was the largest bridge superstructure installed on any Italian heavy cruiser, although the Pola represented something of a halfway house between the lighter designs found on the other ships and Bolzano's installation. Main armament consisted of 4 twin 8-inch turrets with a pair superfiring forward and a similar pair aft. The secondary battery was notionally 16 100mm or 4-inch guns in 8 twin mounts, 4 per side, although she only completed with 4 of these mounts, gaining the other 4 installed in pairs over the following years. 4 single 40mm guns, some anti-aircraft machine guns, and 4 twin torpedo tubes, 2 per side, rounded out the armament. Armour consisted of a 2.8-inch thick belt, a 2-inch thick deck, and 3.9 inches of armour on the turret faces, with speed topping out at 36 knots courtesy of 150,000 shaft horsepower driving 4 screws. Up to 3 aircraft could be carried, with these facilities located amidships between the 2 funnels, which was spaced quite far apart. Before World War II, the ship's career was fairly quiet, the only real excitement being the replacement of the aftmost pair of 100mm mounts with 4 twin 37mm anti-aircraft cannon. The anti-aircraft machine guns would also be replaced during the course of the war with 4 somewhat more useful 20mm cannon. When Italy entered World War II, Bolzano joined her Trento-class half-sisters, but her first call to action was plagued by bad luck. At the Battle of Calabria, the Leander-class HMS Neptune landed a series of hits with 6-inch shells that temporarily jammed her rudder. And later on, she was then attacked by the Regia Aeronautica, who thought, possibly because of the bridge superstructure, that she was a British ship. On the other hand, she did manage to avoid being hit at all during the raid at Taranto, and managed to avoid the 15-inch shells of the crack gunnery ship HMS Renown at the Battle of Cape Spartivento. Once again, at the Battle of Matapan, she avoided British torpedo bombers and then successfully would escort a number of convoys that headed to North Africa, and even when in summer 1941 she was torpedoed by the submarine HMS Triumph, she was fairly rapidly repaired. But her luck finally ran out the next year in summer 1942 when another submarine, this time HMS Unbroken, hit her heavily with torpedoes and set her on fire for good measure. She actually had to be beached to prevent her from sinking, and it took over a month for her to be salvaged. Various ideas were floated to try and repair her quickly, including replacing the damaged boilers with one bigger boiler and a diesel generator, which would allow all boilers to be shut down in port, apart from the diesel generator, and thus conserve fuel. Various ideas to replace the fire-damaged superstructure were also discussed. More radically, it was proposed by some to turn her into a fast transport and anti-aircraft ship that happened to have a sideline in carrier operations, by removing the entirety of the main armament, upgrading her anti-aircraft guns, and then splitting the forward funnel to port and starboard, and removing everything else forward of the aft funnel to allow for the use of up to a dozen catapult-launched RE-2000 fighter bombers. This was ultimately rejected on the grounds that the catapult launches would take far too long, and there would be nowhere for the aircraft to land afterwards unless she happened to be in range of a land base, in which case why weren't they using land-based aircraft? Instead, what repairs could be made were done as and when resources were available, but she was still a long way from operational condition when the Italian armistice occurred in 1943. As she was in German-occupied territory, she was sunk in June 1944 by British and Italian underwater special forces in order to stop the Germans using her hull to block La Spezia's harbour. Her remains would then be raised and scrapped in 1949.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.